Alright guys, today we're just going to do a short video, but probably one of the most important ones because we're going to learn about this CSS property called display, which we've already covered in the labs, but we're going to talk about the display property or the value display inline block, and we're going to see what we can do with that. It's pretty important in terms of doing layouts, as you guys would have already seen. So I'm just going to recap that today with our Kytte project and build a real simple 3-column layout. So let me just load up the Photoshop file and just see what we're going to do here. So we've already built this top section up to this point. We haven't done the clouds yet, but that's something you guys can figure out a bit later. It's pretty easy to do. I'm just going to ignore this bit for now and skip right to this 3-column layout here, because this is where we can really show how important, how useful display inline block is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up this new section here and create a column for each of these 3 columns here. Okay, so as always, let's just go back to Adam. We've got a file. So where we finished off here was the hero. So we finished off about there, and then let's create a new section, and I'm going to call this one, let's see, our portfolio. I'll just call it portfolio. Portfolio. There we go. And as before, we've got this width inside, which we want to kind of control, with the outer width going 100%. So we just want it, basically everything that sits inside our sections to be controlled within this inner width, and we did that before with this div here called class container. So let's just paste that in there. And as always, really good practice, guys, always close off your divs as soon as you've made them. And again, if you click them, you see that blue underline, it shows you where the partner is, so you can easily see. If you do click a tag like this and it doesn't have a blue underline, say like this, see, no underline, that's telling you you missed a tag. So it's just a really good little test to see whether you've actually closed it off properly. Alright, so we've got our container in there. And let's see, we want to make a div for each of these little columns here, don't we? So let's do that. Let's make a div, and put a class. Let's just call it col for now, just short for column. And instead of putting this image and this heading and this text, I'm just going to put a simple paragraph text in here for now. It's always good to start with really simple examples. There we go. Put some fake Latin text in there, long ipsum. So that's my first column. I'm going to put a little gap here so I can visually see where they are, so I can tell where my portfolio has started and where it's ended with my container, and then I can see my individual columns here. So I'm going to paste another one. There we go. That's 3 columns. So that's our markup done. Command S to make sure we saved it, and the little blue dot goes away. And let's go to our CSS and let's put some real simple styles. So let's go to the bottom of our CSS file here, and we're going to start a class for our portfolio section. Portfolio. Let's just put a nice background of yellow so we can see it. That should be enough for now. Let's just go to Chrome and have a look and see what's happened. There we go. Cool. And that's kind of what we expect, right? Because I mean, we haven't done any styles yet for these columns. We've just made them. So there's no CSS. The browser just sees these as real vanilla naked divs. So if I expand here in Chrome Inspector, you'll see as we hover over, there we go, there's our 3 columns. As we hover over, you'll see that they're exactly what we expect. They're display block, aren't they? Because that's what divs are by default. If you don't put any styles, the browser will always use the default for divs, which is display block. And you'll see they always fill 100% width, and they all sit on their own line. So that's kind of what we expect. So let's approach this how we would maybe the floats. If we were to do floats, let's see how that would work. So first thing I'm going to do obviously is make a style for these columns, and you can see this is the reason why we've given them all the same name, because all we have to do is do the styles for it once, and all 3 inherit that. So let's do that first. Let's come down underneath here, and we'll go section, we'll go portfolio, and we'll go .col, which is our div we're looking at, our column div. Let's just put a simple background color on it first. See if it'll actually, there we go, cool. Background color of orange. Always a good first step to do to make sure you've actually written your selector correctly. So go back, refresh. Cool, okay, that's working. That's good. Okay, So now we've got that. Let's try the float option, shall we? So if we go float left, and obviously we want to do 3 columns, so we want to make sure these are referred, and as we know from mathematics, referred is 33.3%. Let's try that, and let's have a look to see what happens. Pretty good, right? Pretty good. Because what we've got there is, remember on our container, we have the overflow auto. If we turn that off, see without that, it all kind of breaks, isn't it? Because what happens is, I mean, forgetting about the hero section just for now, but if we look at our portfolio section, it doesn't really, again, this container height, it can't pick up the height because we've got these divs which are floated. So as soon as something's floated, the container cannot figure out the height. That's why when I'm hovering over a container here, you'll see over here, when I hover over, it says 816.8, which is the width, and it has a height of 0, which means it can't really figure out the height. So that's a big problem, and that's obviously why we put this overflow auto. So the overflow auto is a bit of a hack. It's good when you need to use floats, if you need to use them, but long story short, floats will start to drive you nuts. They're handy every now and again. We just need to do a quick float, something over here, or whether it's an image that's embedded in an article around text. That's pretty much really what they're built for. But when you start doing layouts like this, it starts becoming a bit of a problem. And you'll see more when you start doing clears and things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go straight up here to our container, and I'm going to take off this overflow auto. We're not going to use it anymore. Okay? And even just to keep us not distracted by this broken header up here, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to comment this entire hero, well, the hero section. You know, that's where we've got the, you know, the headline and our spaceman. I'm going to comment the whole thing out. And this is a really handy technique to get used to, guys. It's a really good way of problem solving and hiding things so you know it's not really getting in the way. Cool. So now I'm just dealing with, there we go, you can see it's all commented out. It's gone green there in the inspector. So now I'm only dealing with this portfolio section. So as you'll see, we've got our column, they're all great. And there's our container. See, as I'm hovering over, there's no area because it's showing 0 up here. You'll see 0. So that's where our problem is, because really this background of portfolio should be yellow, shouldn't it? So the floats aren't really working. So let's turn the floats off. And this is what this whole tutorial is about not using floats. Okay. So let's just, all I've done is set my column to orange, and I've set a width to 33%. Let's refresh it and have a look. Okay, cool. So we've got our yellow background back again now, which is good. That's because our container now has a height. As you can see there, it says 464 up here. So that means the height has been interpreted based on what's inside of it, which is great. And obviously, again, the portfolio above it is getting that as well. That's where our yellow background is coming from. Cool. So there's our container in the middle. We expand it, and there's our columns. So what we can see here is we know divs have a display of block by default. And that's what the browser puts in there without us having to do it. And it's interpreted our width, which is great. So the width is working awesomely. But even though we've set the width to 33%, if I hover over the first column here, you'll see this big patch over here, which is empty. So you think naturally that, you know, this div would come up and sit up here, but that's because, remember, the golden rule of display Inline-Block is that it always has its own line. It's really greedy. It won't share that line with anyone, no matter how, you know, narrow the width is. We can put the width as narrow as that if we want to, or it doesn't matter how wide it is. It will always take up the whole line. Well, it'll always use the whole line for itself and not share it with anyone else. So that even though that space is void and the width is locked down here, it will always be empty. So that's just one of the qualities of display a block. Okay. So in order for us to combat that, I mean, display inline is not going to work because an inline is just an inline element that sits next to each other. We can't use whips and things. So that's where we use the power of display inline dash block. As soon as we do that, you'll see they now sit next to each other. Ah, that's better. See what I mean? So now we've got our div there, 33% display inline block, our next div, and our final div. But you may notice something. What's interesting is, I mean, we set a width of a third, so really these should all fit. We've got 3 of them, so it means they should all fit on one line because all 3 of them add up to 100%. And remember that it's 100% width of its container, so that's just A little reminder. So really, I don't understand why this one's gone on the bottom here. That this one here should be up here. But you'll see we've got a problem. See this gap? You're probably wondering where on earth did that gap come from? So as I hover over, there's my div. It's display inline block. That means this one appears next to it in line. And there's that little gap there. Well, it turns out display inline block kind of assumes, you know, dealing with a bit of text or a button or something. And as we know, when text or elements go next to each other, when they're display inline blind, there's always this little gap. And that's just the browser just thinking, just doing that for you. It just assumes that it's going to give you a little bit of space there. So really, we're almost there. We just need to tell the browser that, hey, you know, this gap is not cool. All right. So let's jump in and see how we can do that. Where that's actually coming from, here's the trick. It's actually got nothing to do with your CSS. Your CSS is perfectly fine. It's actually got to do with our HTML here. So see where this div here starts and stops, and this one starts and stops. You'll notice that we have a gap between them, don't we? That gap is all the space here. So what happens is the browser sees this, and you know, no matter how big it is or how small it is, doesn't matter. It still sees that as a little space. You know, just interpreting it as a space between a word or a button or something like that. So we need to fool the browser into thinking that this space doesn't exist. There's a couple of ways we could do that. The dirty way would be to just delete the space altogether. So now there's absolutely no space. And same with this one. Bring it right up next to the last one. Save it. And that'll work. Pretty happy. But you can see now our code looks pretty ugly, doesn't it? We're not indenting it as we should be. And trust me, like when you start building big sites and you've got divs closing next to divs starting immediately, you're going to get an absolute headache. So this is not really a good solution. So let's undo that. So what else can we do to get rid of this space here? Well, it's actually a little bit of trickery. What we can do is use a HTML comment. So you start a comment there, and then you end it here. Now what that's done is, so now the browser sees this space. It's tricking the browser into thinking that's void. It's completely empty, which is ideal. That's exactly what we want. And you'll see obviously that, you know, it puts the tabbing out a little bit, so you kind of have to manually put that back again, which can be a little bit tedious sometimes. Ah, there we go, see? So now these line up right there. So that's good. Cool. So that's all you have to do. And you don't probably need a space there as well. You could just put it like that. So, and we'll do the same here for this one, obviously. Otherwise we'll have a blowout of plus 100%. So, and end it there. And you're going to do, let's go back. Perfect. So now we had what we had before, but now the space has been corrected and it's been tricking the browser thinking it's void. Let's save that and head back. Excellent, it works. So there we have a section there. Inside it we've also got our width container, and then we've got 3 columns. And you see this little green comments appear there. One column there, one column there, one column there. And they both are set to 33.3%, add up to 100. And they're sitting right next to each other. And the beauty of this is, let's say for example that our middle column had more text. Let's just put another paragraph in there. What's happening is we actually have more control over how these are vertically aligned, and that really is one of the biggest powers of using. I'll just change that word so it looks a little bit different. Like that. Yeah, that looks slightly different now. That's the biggest benefit of using a display inline block, because you can't really get this effect with floats. Okay. So what we can now do is we can go back to our CSS, and there's our column. And you see how we put display inline block. And usually, always immediately afterwards, there's another CSS property called vertical align. There you go. And this is where these two should always go together. These are like twins, really. And this is where you get to set, you know, when you've got these blocks appearing next to each other, display inline block, how they're going to be vertically aligned. And naturally, they're always aligned to the bottom. You can see here, I haven't set any vertical align, and they've just naturally aligned to the bottom. So that's default. So if we set that to top, let's see what happens. Ah, that's better. That's probably more what you'd expect, especially with most of the common design layouts these days. And you can also put middle as well. So if you ever need to use that, use middle. Excellent. So you can see that's really handy, can't you? You have a lot more control. So this is why we use display inline block for doing layouts. And there's a pretty good high chance that whenever you're dealing with, let me set that back to top again. I usually put top just by default because it's 9 times out of 10 it's the one you'd probably be using. There's a good chance whenever you're doing any website design, like I was seeing on our Kytte project, that there's a pretty high chance you're going to have divs sitting next to divs, like that, like this. There's one here, and there's one here, one down there. So display inline block is just a golden rule. It's one of the biggest tools and assets in terms of doing CSS layouts. So it's just really important to understand how that works. So now we know that. Now we've built our little layout. We can now cross that over to our header where we use floats. Oh, actually no, before I do that, one last thing before we move on to that last step. As we can see here, our columns are sitting right next to each other because we set the width at exactly 33.3%, and we don't have any margins or paddings, do we? So let's solve that, because I mean, this obviously isn't an ideal situation. We're in the real world case, we want to have some padding on each of the columns there. So let's start with, let's put some padding. Let's say padding of, say, 30 pixels. Okay, refresh. Here we go. We're into another problem. So what's happened here is we've got our columns. We've set the width to a third, 33.3%, and we've added some padding of 30 pixels. So that's now adding obviously 30 pixels on top, right, and the bottom. So, but just ignoring the heights for now. We're just looking at widths. So now we've got an extra 30 there, 30 there. So that's an extra 60 pixels in total. So what's actually happening is this is where the browser is just doing what it always used to do. It's all about the box sizing model. So what it's doing is the browser saying, okay, you want a width of 33.3%, but you want padding as well. And what it's doing is it's adding this padding on top of that width. So you've got 33.3%, but now it's added on 30 and 30, because obviously you've got 30 on the left, 30 on the right. So you've added on an extra 60 pixels. So it's 33.3%, plus 60 pixels. That's what it's doing. So hence why we have a blowout. It's going way over 100%, which is why it's going on a second line. So you're probably wondering, that's a bit of a pain in the ass. Why can't the browser just keep it always locked out at 33.3% and absorb the padding inside of it? Well, good question. And turns out we can actually do that. Woohoo! And what we do is we go to the very top of our document, and this is something you do on every project. And basically what we do is we can actually tell the browser to, instead of using the old box sizing model, where it adds on the padding on top of the width, which is what we don't want, we can actually use a new model. And to do that, just like how we selected a tag like the body, for example, in CSS we can do this really dangerous one, which is called star. And again, you don't want to be using the star command. You don't really want to be using this star command for or selector at all. Really, it's really dangerous, because what that's doing is that's saying select every single element on the page, like everything. I call it like setting the religion, really. So it's we go inside here, and what's going to do is we're saying to the browser, everything on this entire CSS file and in the HTML file as well, every single element has a box sizing, of border box. It's the kind of thing that you write once and you forget about it. It's at the very top of your document, and that's it. And you don't put anything else in here, no margins, no paddings, nothing. You don't want to put anything in there. The only thing that's really common for the entire website is just using this box sizing model. So now we've set that, let's save that, and let's go back. And we haven't done anything to our columns. All we've done is we've kept them with 30 pixels. Now let's just refresh. Ta-da! And it all works. So there we have a column. It has a width of 33.3%, and we've added some padding on, but it's kept the width locked at 33.3%, and it's absorbed the padding inside of it. So this is just the absolute ideal situation. We can now click in here, and I can click inside my padding and make it more or make it less, and see how it's never going to blow out the width. It's never going to blow out, and that's ideal. This is the perfect environment you want. Set up your columns, make sure they're always a third, and then control your paddings without having to keep breaking the layout every time. So that's perfect. That's exactly what we want. And you're probably wondering, okay, that's great, but what if I want to add margins in between these? Well, Okay, let's try that. Let's head on down to our column. There it is. And let's put a margin top and bottom of nothing. We're not touching that. And on the left, let's say 5%. Here we go. So this is the trick. Even though we've got that border box size and border box at the top there, it doesn't account for the margins. Okay, it just doesn't. So even if we turn the padding off, so I mean this gap is still the same. So it's not affected by paddings. So as soon as so what's actually happening here is the browser is saying, okay, you want a width of 33.3%. The padding's being absorbed within that, so that's always going to be the max width. But you've got a margin on the left and right of 5 pixels. So this is always going to be added onto this. See what I mean? So what happens is with margins, these can't be absorbed within the width. Unfortunately, they always get added on outside. So the situation we're dealing with right here is if we know we're going to have a margin on the left and right of 5%, that means we need to take off 5 on the left, 5 on the right, so that's 10 in total. We need to take off 10 from the width here in order for it to add up to 33.3%. So we need to take away 10 from 33, which means 23. Refresh, and now it works. So just to recap that, the browser sees this as, it says, okay, you've got a width of 23.3%. The browser, just ignores the padding because it's on the inside, so that the width is always going to be locked out at that. But then it adds on, from this value here, adds on 5% on the left. That's 5% on the right, and that's going to give you the browser total width of 33.3%, which is what we want. That's the total width. And obviously, once you times that by 3 columns, you get 100% width in total. So there you go. Hopefully that clarifies some things, because it's definitely something you're going to run into. You'll do some nice little columns, and you want to put some margins, and you'll be sitting there pulling your hair out, wondering why it's broken again. So that's as simple as it works. And again, so now if you want to then change this, so let's see, if you want to take that down to 2, what's going to happen is you've now got your 33.3%, and you're going to take away 2 on the left, go 2 on the right, and you get 29.3%. So that works. So 29.3, like that. Come back here, refresh. There we go, that's a slightly better margin. And we'll probably reduce our padding just a little bit as well. Oops, there it is. Put that at 15. Excellent. It's got a pretty good situation there. Alright, so now we've got a good understanding of display inline block and the border box model and some paddings and margins. Let's go back to our header. Sorry, not our header, our hero section here of our spaceman, and let's fix it up, because we had problems before. Well, we were using floats, so now we want to get rid of floats and convert this to display inline block. So let's comment that out for now. Let's go back and refresh, and what we'll see is, because our container, remember our container had what was it? Had overflow auto here, which was fixing it all up. So if I put this back, it's going to fix everything. Like that, remember? Okay, so let's pretend that's how it was before, because that's how it was. So we've got a situation here now where we've now learnt this new method of display inline block, and it's much more superior. So let's go back to our hero. We've got our headline here and our spaceman. And these are our 2 elements which are floating. See, float left, and our spaceman is float right. So we want to get rid of these floats and convert these to display inline block. So to start with, let's turn off the floats. So we've got our headline div here. That's being floated left, so we want to correct that. So in order for me to do that, obviously I'll go into my style sheet and find it. There's actually a more efficient way to find it much faster. As I've clicked on my headline here, it's telling me that's my CSS, which I've written. It also tells me it's in the style sheet on styles.css, but also tells me the line. See, 75? This is really handy. So I can come back to my style sheet and I can just go, so I could be really further down the page here, or wherever I am. I could just go Control G and just go 75. And that takes me to that line. And there we go, see? It took me straight to the line where headline is. So that's just a handy tip for efficiency there. So there's my float. I'm going to take the whole thing off, delete it, and same for my spaceman. If I put my spaceman here, there we go, he's floating to the right, I want to delete that, and that's on line 87. Luckily enough I can see 87 is just down here. So look, delete that float as well. So now we have a spaceman, width 40%, which he is, but he has no float, and the headline over here has a width of 50% and no float. So let's save that, come back, refresh, and see what's happened. Okay, cool. So this is what we had before. So we've got our headline div, we've got a width set, but obviously because it's display block, it means it always sits on its own line. Even if there's space over here which is void, doesn't matter. It always has its own line, it's greedy. Same with the spaceman, both greedy, got their own line. Okay, so we're back to this point here. And as we learnt before, if we want something to sit next to each other, or objects to sit next to each other, we use display inline block. That's what this whole tutorial is all about. So display inline block, and as we said before, the twin that always comes along with this is vertical line, and we'll put top here. So to save yourself some time, I'm going to copy that for our spaceman as well. There we go. Let's come back and see how that's worked. Wow, and there we go. We've got our headline, which is width 50%, inline block, and spaceman, which is inline block, and 40%. Perfect, right? And that's all it takes. But you can see here, obviously, 50% width and 40% width doesn't add up to 100, so we're pretty safe. We don't need to worry too much about that gap. But if we were to change it, let's say we want our spaceman to be 40%, and we want our headline to be 60%. So that's a 100% relationship. We've got 60 for the headline, 40 for the spaceman. Let's say that's what we wanted. Refresh, and we're going to have that blowout issue again. Remember? That's because we have that little gap in between. So let's go back to our HTML and get rid of that. So, here we go. So there's our hero section. So here we go, there's our headline. That's where it starts and stops, and there's our spaceman. And the gap is here and here, isn't it? That's that gap we need to get rid of. So, like we did before, we'll put a little comment there. Starts there, ends there. Easy. Go back, refresh. Beautiful. And that's just the perfect relationship, isn't it? We've told the browser it's going to behave exactly how we want it to. We've got a hero section, we've got our container inside there. Then we've got our headline, which is a div at 6% width, and our spaceman, which is 40% width. And the beauty of this now is because we have that border, the box model set to border box, means we can now change paddings on here and the widths won't be affected. They're always going to stay the same. So I can now jump to my headline. And let's say I want to put a bit of padding on the right here to make sure that, because I mean right now you can see these are touching each other. They're immediately right next to each other. You see where that line is, it finishes right where his fingertips. So they are essentially touching each other. So I want to make sure there's always a gap to make sure that this text never goes right to the edge, right along his fingers. So I then go to my headline. I'm going to put a background color first, just so you can see it. Of green. Yeah, so you can see it's touching right there. So this is something you want to be aware of to make sure there's padding on the inside. So I would then say padding on the right. I'll just say something like 5%. Now when I refresh, if I hover over the headline, see there's that little gap there? Perfect. And that's that 5% gap. I could jump in here and make it bigger if I wanted to. I could, make that, something like that. It's a bit crazy. I'll bring it right back down to about 5%. That's a good safety margin. Get rid of that green background. Perfect. All right, cool. So now we have display inline block working awesomely. We've got rid of our floats. We don't need to worry about those anymore. And because we got rid of our floats, that means we can get rid of this overflow auto. Because again, it's just a nice little hack which makes it work with the floats, but you do actually end up getting scroll bars appear. That's one of the biggest problems. And you don't have nowhere near as much control when it comes to the vertical alignment as well, which is the most important thing when it comes to some layouts. So let's get rid of that overflow auto. We don't need it anymore. And the last thing I want to do is, let's have a look down here, just get rid of some of these colors. So let's see, that's our portfolio section, which is all yellow. So let's add a bit of padding in the top and bottom first. Let's do that. So bottom of our page, there it is. So I'll just say padding, let's say 40%, 40 pixels on the top, nothing on the left and right. Refresh, there it is, a bit of padding on the top, a bit of padding on the bottom. Get rid of my background color of yellow, and same with my, so there we go, and same with my columns as well. Let's get rid of that background orange color, and refresh. Beautiful. Now you can see you got a pretty cool layout. It's responding really nicely to percentages, display inline block, got all your vertical alignments controlled there. You've got a really good setup to start making a cool design. Alright, so that pretty much wraps up for this lesson. It's probably the most important lesson in terms of learning how to use that. It's going to be your best friend. As you can tell with all your layouts, you'll no doubt very often be putting objects next to each other. So it's really crucial to learn that. And now we're all set up ready for the next lesson, which is going to be adding some responsive CSS with media queries. And basically what that's going to do is it's going to detect when the browser gets small, so I want a certain breakpoint, and then we're going to add some custom CSS to change how the website looks when the browser is this narrow. And that's going to be really helpful if you're viewing it on a tablet or more specifically a mobile phone. So we'll be able to sort out these tiny whips issues and make them one column and all that kind of stuff. Cool. So I'll see you guys next lesson. Cheers.